The golden sun bled across the horizon as they dragged her onto the auction block. Hands bound and dignity stripped away like the fine clothes she once wore. Ruby Sinclair, though no one here knew that name, not anymore stood with her chin high despite the tears threatening to spill down her dirt-streaked face. The Montana Territory in 1878 was unforgiving to women alone, especially those accused of crimes they didn't commit. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the makeshift platform erected at the edge of Redemption Creek, a dusty frontier town that had seen better days. Next up, a woman no name, no history, strong back, good teeth. Bidding starts at $20. Ruby flinched at the crude assessment. 3 weeks ago, she'd been the respected daughter of a Boston banker. Now she was property, accused of stealing from her employer after fleeing an arranged marriage that would have destroyed her spirit just as surely as these ropes cut into her wrists. The crowd of rough men jostled forward, their eyes traveling over her with cruel assessment. Some spat tobacco juice in the dust. Others laughed and called out lewd suggestions that made her stomach turn. 25, called a grizzled miner. 30, countered a man missing 3 fingers. Ruby scanned the crowd desperately, looking for any face that might show a hint of mercy. The sun was nearly gone now, shadows lengthening across the packed dirt of the town square. Sold at sundown, that was what the sheriff had told her when he'd locked her in the jail cell, after the stagecoach robbery had left her stranded, her identification papers and last money stolen. $40. The new voice cut through the crowd like a knife. The crowd parted and Ruby saw him for the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair beneath a well-worn hat. His face was tanned by the sun, a short beard outlining a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention steady and clear, regarding her not as merchandise but as a human being. $40 from Ross Calloway, the auctioneer announced, looking surprised. Anyone care to go higher, the miner spat. Too much for damaged goods. 40 going once, going twice. Sold to Ross Calloway. The transaction was completed with cruel efficiency. The sheriff pocketed the money and shoved Ruby toward her purchaser with no more ceremony than if he'd sold a horse. Ross Calloway untied her hands but kept a firm grip on her arm as he led her away from the crowd. Ruby stumbled alongside him, her legs weak from days in the small jail cell. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Whatever you plan to do, not here," he cut her off, his voice low. "Too many ears. Just walk." He led her to a sturdy bay horse tethered outside the saloon. Without warning, he lifted her onto the saddle, then mounted behind her. Ruby stiffened at the contact, but his hold remained impersonal as he urged the horse forward. They rode in silence through the town and beyond, the landscape opening into rolling hills bathed in the last light of day. Finally, he stopped beside a clear stream and dismounted, then helped her down. "Drink," he said, gesturing to the water. Ruby fell to her knees beside the stream, cupping the cool water to her parched lips. When she'd quenched her thirst, she turned to face the man who now owned her. "Why did you buy me?" she asked directly, her voice stronger now. Ross Calloway regarded her for a long moment. "You don't belong on an auction block. And where do I belong? Your bed, your kitchen." Her words were bitter but tinged with fear. He shook his head. "You belong wherever you choose. I didn't buy you to own you." Ruby laughed, a harsh sound. "Then you wasted $40, Mr. Calloway." "Ross," he corrected. "And I don't consider saving someone's life a waste." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle. "Food, eat." She unwrapped the bundle to find jerky and hardtack. As she ate, he spoke. "My ranch is about 3 hours' ride from here. You can stay there tonight, get cleaned up. In the morning, we can figure out what you want to do next." Ruby eyed him suspiciously. "Why would you help me? You don't even know my name." "No," he agreed. "I don't. What is it?" She hesitated. Her name was the last thing that belonged truly to her. "Ruby," she finally said. "Ruby Sinclair." "Ruby," he repeated as if testing the sound of it. Well, Ruby Sinclair, I've seen what happens to women sold like cattle in these parts. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again. Something in his tone made her believe him. Again, Ross looked away. My sister, 3 years ago, I was away driving cattle to market by the time I got back. He didn't finish the sentence. They rode in silence as darkness fell completely, stars appearing in a velvet sky. Ruby found herself leaning back against his solid chest, exhaustion overtaking her wariness. When they arrived at his ranch, it was more substantial than she had expected, a solid log house with a wide porch, a barn, and several outbuildings. A dog came running to greet them, barking excitedly. "That's Ranger," Ross said as he helped her down from the horse. "He's all noise, no bite." Inside, the house was simple but clean. A main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. "You can have my room," he said, opening one of the doors. "I'll sleep out here." Ruby stood awkwardly, clutching her ragged skirts. "I have nothing to wear." "There are some of my sister's things in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Help yourself." He paused. "There's a washtub in the lean-to behind the kitchen. I'll heat some water for you." True to his word, Ross prepared a bath for her, then left her to privacy. Ruby sank into the warm water with a sigh that came from her soul. She scrubbed away the grime of the jail cell, the touch of men's eyes, the humiliation of the auction block. In the trunk, she found simple dresses, undergarments, and even a nightgown. They were slightly large on her frame, but clean and whole. After dressing, she ventured back into the main room. Ross had made coffee and was sitting at the table, staring into the cup as if it held answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked up, and something passed across his face, surprise, perhaps, at her transformation from bedraggled prisoner to woman. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said. "I can take you to the next town over when you're ready, or to the train station in Helena." "Why are you doing this?" Ruby asked again, needing to understand. Ross sighed. "Because it's the right thing, and because—" he hesitated. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything." That night, Ruby slept in a real bed for the first time in weeks, surrounded by the faint scent of lavender from the dried flowers tucked among the linens. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of the auction block and hands reaching for her. In the morning, she found Ross already up, cooking breakfast. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the small house. "You sleep all right?" he asked, sliding eggs onto a plate for her. "Yes, thank you." The lie came easily. "What will you have me do today?" Ross looked confused. "Do, to earn my keep. I can cook, clean, so." He shook his head. "You don't owe me labor, Ruby. Rest, recover your strength." But Ruby couldn't sit idle. After breakfast, she insisted on washing the dishes, then swept the floor. Ross watched her with an expression she couldn't read before heading out to tend to his livestock. Days passed in this manner. Ruby slowly regained her strength and color. She took over the cooking, mended Ross's shirts, and brought order to the bachelor's household. They developed a routine, careful and cordial with each other. Ross, she learned, had come west after the war, homesteaded this land, and built his ranch from nothing. He raised horses primarily, with some cattle. He worked from sunrise to sunset, his body lean and strong from the labor. Sometimes she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, a question in his eyes that he never voiced. A week after her arrival, Ruby was hanging laundry when she heard approaching hoofbeats. Shading her eyes against the sun, she saw 3 riders approaching. Her heart raced with sudden fear. Ross emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Get inside," he said quietly as he passed her. Ruby retreated to the porch but remained where she could hear. "Calloway," the lead rider called. "Heard you got yourself a woman from the auction in Redemption Creek." Ross stood his ground. "What's your business here, Tanner?" "Just being neighborly." The man called Tanner dismounted. "Wanted to see this prize for myself." "She's not for viewing," Ross said, his voice deceptively calm. "And you're trespassing." Tanner laughed. "Come now, we're just curious. Word is you paid good money for a fugitive. Sheriff in Redemption Creek says she's wanted for theft back east." "Sheriff Jenkins is a liar and a drunk," Ross replied. "And you still need to leave." Ruby's breath caught. She hadn't told Ross about the false accusations. How much did he know? The tension between the men was palpable. Tanner's hand hovered near his gun, but Ross didn't move, his stance relaxed yet somehow ready. "You always were a fool for a pretty face, Calloway," Tanner spat. "Ever since that Mexican girl got herself killed." Ross moved so fast Ruby barely saw it. One moment he was standing still, the next, Tanner was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose, and Ross was standing over him with a cocked revolver. "Get on your horse and ride out," Ross said, his voice deadly quiet. "And if I ever hear you mention Alina's name again, I'll kill you." The other two riders helped Tanner onto his horse. They departed in a cloud of dust, Tanner's threats carried away on the wind. Ross stood watching until they were out of sight, then turned toward the house. His face went still when he saw Ruby on the porch. "You should have gone inside," he said. "Who was that?" she asked. "Wade Tanner, owns the next ranch over, we have history." He holstered his gun and walked past her into the house. Ruby followed. "And who was Alina?" Ross stopped, his back to her. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. "She was going to be my wife," he finally said. "She was murdered 3 years ago, same time my sister disappeared." "I'm sorry," Ruby said softly. He nodded once, then disappeared into his room. The door closed firmly behind him. That night, Ruby lay awake thinking about Ross Calloway, about the pain he carried and the kindness he showed despite it. When she heard him cry out in his sleep, she almost went to him but stopped herself. Their careful arrangement felt suddenly fragile. The next morning, Ross announced he needed to ride to town for supplies. "Will you be all right here alone?" he asked. "I'll be back by nightfall." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Be careful." After he left, Ruby threw herself into cleaning the house thoroughly. In the back of a cupboard, she found a box containing a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. She knew she shouldn't read them, but when she saw they were addressed to Rosalind Calloway, she understood they belonged to Ross's sister. The letters painted a picture of a vibrant young woman who had come west to join her brother, only to find herself alone when his cattle drive took longer than expected. The last letter was dated just before Ross had said she disappeared. Ruby carefully replaced the letters, her heart heavy with the tragedy that had shaped this quiet, honorable man. She was preparing dinner when she heard a horse approaching. Thinking it was Ross returning early, she went to the door with a smile that died when she saw Wade Tanner dismounting, alone this time but with a rifle in his hands. "Well, well," he drawled. "Looks like the little lady is home alone." Ruby shut the door and threw the bolt, her mind racing. The rifle Ross kept by the door was gone. He'd taken it with him. She backed away as Tanner pounded on the door. "Open up, darling. I just want to talk." She ran to Ross's room, searching frantically for a weapon. In the bedside drawer, she found a revolver. Her hands trembled as she checked that it was loaded. The window shattered in the main room. Tanner was breaking in. Ruby positioned herself behind the bedroom door, the revolver heavy in her hands. She'd never shot a gun before, but her father had shown her the mechanics once, believing every woman should know how to protect herself. Footsteps approached the bedroom. Ruby held her breath. "There you are," Tanner said as he pushed open the door. His eyes widened when he saw the gun in her hands. "Now don't be stupid, girl. Get out," Ruby commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Tanner laughed. "You won't shoot me. You don't have the gun," roared, louder than Ruby had expected. Tanner stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, his face a mask of shock and fury. "You bitch," he lunged for her. Ruby fired again. This time Tanner fell to the floor, moaning. Ruby kept the gun trained on him as she edged around his body. "Don't move," she warned. She backed away, never taking her eyes off him, and secured the rifle he had dropped. Only then did she allow herself to shake, the full realization of what she had done washing over her in a wave. Hours passed. Ruby kept watch, the revolver never far from her hand as Tanner drifted in and out of consciousness. The bullet had entered his shoulder, not fatal but serious enough to keep him immobile. When Ross finally returned, the sun was setting. She heard his voice calling her name, panic edging his words when he saw the broken window. "Ruby, Ruby, where are you?" "In here," she called, her voice hoarse from tension. Ross burst into the room, gun drawn. He took in the scene in one glance: Tanner on the floor, Ruby pale but steady with the revolver in her hand. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. She shook her head. "He broke in, I shot him." Ross knelt briefly beside Tanner, checking his wound. "He'll live," he said grimly. "Unfortunately." He crossed to Ruby then, taking the gun gently from her trembling hands. Without a word, he pulled her against his chest. She broke then, sobbing into his shirt, the fear and tension of the hours washing away in his embrace. "I've got you," Ross murmured into her hair. "You're safe now." Later, after the local sheriff had come and taken Tanner away, after Ross had boarded up the broken window and built up the fire, they sat together at the kitchen table, cups of coffee growing cold between them. "You could have died today," Ross said, his voice rough with emotion. "Because of me, because I brought you here." "No," Ruby shook her head. "You saved me. In Redemption Creek, you gave me back my freedom, my name." "Your name?" His brow furrowed. "They took everything from me," she explained. "Even my name. When you bought me, you gave it back to me." "Ask me who I was." Ross looked at her for a long moment. "Ruby Sinclair," he said softly. "Who are you, really? I need to know the truth." So she told him everything about her father's death, the arranged marriage to pay his debts, her flight west as a lady's companion, the robbery that left her stranded and accused when money went missing. "I didn't steal anything," she finished, "but no one would believe me." "I believe you," Ross said simply. Those 3 words, spoken with such certainty, broke something open inside Ruby's heart. "Why?" "Because I see you," he answered. "Not what others say about you, you." Their eyes met across the table, and Ruby felt the world shift beneath her. This man who had saved her life, who had given her back her name and asked for nothing in return, she was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt like coming home. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "That depends on you," Ross replied. "If you want to leave, I'll take you wherever you want to go. If you want to stay." He hesitated. "You're welcome here, Ruby, for as long as you want." "And if I want to stay forever?" The question hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Ross reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "Then I would be the most fortunate man in Montana territory." The days that followed were a sweet unfolding. Ross courted Ruby properly, despite the fact that they lived under the same roof. He brought her wildflowers, took her riding to see the beauty of his land, read to her in the evenings by lamplight. Ruby flourished under his attention, her natural vibrancy returning. She sang as she worked around the house, planted a garden, and learned to ride like a Montana woman rather than a Boston lady. At night, they talked for hours, sharing their stories, their dreams, their fears. Ross told her about growing up in Virginia, about losing his parents young, about raising his sister Rosalind and coming west to start over after the war had taken everything. "Elena was our neighbor's daughter," he said one night as they sat on the porch watching the stars. "Beautiful, fierce, kind. We were going to be married when I got back from the cattle drive, but while I was gone there was trouble with rustlers. Her father was killed and she—" His voice broke. "They found her in the creek, and Rosalind was just gone, no trace." Ruby leaned her head against his shoulder. "You still look for her, don't you?" "Every time I go to a new town," he admitted. "I ask questions, show her picture. 3 years now and nothing." "Don't give up hope," Ruby said softly. "Miracles happen." Ross looked down at her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Yes," he agreed. "They do." He kissed her then, a gentle question that she answered by winding her arms around his neck and drawing him closer. Their first kiss was a beginning, a promise, a healing of old wounds. In September, with the first hints of autumn gilding the cottonwoods along the creek, Ross took Ruby into town for a proper outing. They had dinner at the hotel, a luxury that made Ruby blush with pleasure. Afterward, they walked along the main street, arm in arm. Outside the general store, Ross stopped suddenly. "Wait here a moment," he said, a nervous energy about him that Ruby found endearing. She watched through the window as he spoke with the shopkeeper, who reached beneath the counter and handed him a small box. Ruby's heart began to race. When Ross returned, he led her to a bench beneath a large oak tree. "Ruby," he began, his voice unusually hesitant, "when I saw you on that auction block, something told me I had to save you. I never imagined you would end up saving me." "Ross," she started, but he shook his head. "Please, let me finish or I'll lose my nerve entirely." He took a deep breath. "Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions, carrying my grief and guilt like stones. You brought light back into my life, Ruby Sinclair." He dropped to one knee before her, opening the small box to reveal a gold ring with a single pearl. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Ruby's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Ross Calloway, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her to her feet and into his arms. Their kiss sealed the promise, witnessed by the townsfolk who smiled indulgently at the couple. On the ride home, Ruby couldn't stop looking at her ring gleaming in the moonlight. "It's beautiful," she said. "It was my mother's," Ross told her. "My father gave it to her when they had nothing but each other and dreams." "Like us," Ruby said softly. "No," Ross corrected, pulling her closer against him on the saddle. "We have everything." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in town. Ruby wore a cream-colored dress ordered from Helena with wildflowers in her hair. Ross cut a handsome figure in his best suit, his eyes never leaving his bride as she walked down the aisle to him. The reception was held at their ranch, their home. Neighbors brought food and music, dancing and celebration lasting well into the night. Ruby moved among the guests, accepting congratulations with a radiant smile, her hand rarely leaving her husband's. As the last guests departed, Ross swept Ruby into his arms and carried her across the threshold. "Mrs. Calloway," he murmured against her lips. "I like the sound of that," she replied, her arms tightening around his neck. That night, they consummated their marriage with tender passion, learning each other's bodies as thoroughly as they had learned each other's hearts. Ruby discovered the power of physical love in Ross's gentle hands and whispered endearments. Ross found healing in Ruby's wholehearted surrender to their union. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the moonlight filtering through the bedroom window, Ross traced the curve of Ruby's cheek with his finger. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he admitted. "After Alina, after Rosalind, I thought that part of me was dead." Ruby kissed his palm. "We carry our past with us, but it doesn't define our future." "You are my future," Ross said. "You and the family will build together." The years that followed proved the truth of those words. Ruby and Ross built a life together on the ranch, expanding their operations, improving the house, and welcoming children into their family. Their first daughter, Alina Rose, was born on a snowy December night almost a year after their wedding. Ross wept when he held her for the first time, overcome by the miracle of new life and the honor of naming her after those he had lost. 2 years later, their son James joined the family, a sturdy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Ruby's Eastern education proved valuable for keeping the books and corresponding with buyers. Ross's natural skill with horses and cattle built their reputation across the territory. Together, they created something neither could have achieved alone. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ross surprised Ruby with a trip to Helena. While there, he took her to a photographer's studio to have a family portrait made a luxury they hadn't indulged in before. As they posed with Alina Rose and James, Ruby's heart swelled with gratitude. From the auction block to this moment of perfect happiness, the journey still seemed miraculous to her. That evening, as they prepared for a special dinner, a hotel attendant brought a note to their room. Ross read it with a frown, then handed it to Ruby. "Someone wants to meet with me," he said. "Claims to have information about Rosalind." Ruby squeezed his hand. "Go," she urged. "I'll get the children ready for dinner." Ross kissed her quickly. "I won't be long," but he was. The dinner hour came and went with no sign of him. Ruby put the children to bed in the adjoining room of their suite, her worry growing with each passing hour. Finally, well past midnight, she heard his footsteps in the hallway. When he entered, his face was ashen, his eyes red-rimmed. "Ross," she asked, alarmed. "What is it? What happened?" He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "She's alive," he said, his voice barely audible. "Rosalind is alive," Ruby gasped. "Where? How?" "California," he answered. "She escaped from the men who took her and made her way to San Francisco, changed her name, afraid they would find her again." He looked up at Ruby, his expression stunned. "She saw our photograph in a newspaper article about Montana ranchers, recognized me." "Is she coming here?" Ruby asked, sitting beside him and taking his hand. Ross nodded. "She's on her way, should arrive within the week." He turned to Ruby, his eyes filled with wonder and gratitude. "You told me not to give up hope. You were right." Ruby wrapped her arms around her husband, holding him as emotion overwhelmed him. "Family always finds its way back to each other," she whispered. A week later, Ross and Ruby stood together on the platform of the Helena train station. Alina, Rose, and James beside them, watching as the train from the west pulled in with a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam. Passengers began to disembark. And then a woman stepped down, her gaze searching the platform until it found Ross. She was older, changed by the years and experiences, but unmistakably Rosalind Calloway. Brother and sister stood frozen for a moment, staring at each other across the crowded platform. Then Ross moved, covering the distance between them in long strides, gathering his sister into an embrace that spoke of years of loss and searching and never giving up. Ruby followed more slowly with the children, giving the siblings their moment. When she reached them, Ross turned to her with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Ruby, this is Rosalind," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My sister. Rosalind, this is my wife, Ruby, and our children, Alina, Rose, and James." Rosalind embraced Ruby warmly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For loving him, for giving him back his joy." "Welcome home," Ruby replied, her own eyes filling with tears. "We've been waiting for you." That night, as the expanded family gathered around the table in their hotel suite, sharing stories and beginning the long process of healing old wounds, Ruby watched her husband. His face was alight with happiness, the last shadow lifted from his heart. He caught her watching and smiled, a private message passing between them. Later, when the children were asleep and Rosalind had retired to her own room, Ross pulled Ruby into his arms. 10 years ago, if someone had told me this would be my life, I would have called them a liar," he said, his voice low and fervent. "A beautiful wife who knows me to my soul, children to carry our legacy. My sister returned to us safe and whole." Ruby touched his face gently. "And it all started with a sunset auction and a nameless woman." "Not nameless," Ross corrected, "just waiting for someone to ask who she was." He kissed her deeply. "Ruby Calloway, the best name I've ever heard." As they held each other in the moonlight, Ruby thought about the journey that had brought them here. From despair to hope, from loneliness to love, from broken to whole. All because one man had looked past what others saw and recognized her true worth. She had been sold at Sundown with no name. The cowboy had given her his and never looked back. And together, they had built a life more precious than gold in the wilds of Montana territory.